that when this Chinese spy balloon was kind of transiting across the United States back in February, it was able to capture some images as well as collect some signals intelligence from some sensitive U.S. military installations. Now, U.S. intelligence officials are not overly concerned because they say that this was not much more than what a regular Chinese satellite that is constantly orbiting above these same sites could potentially collect. But at the same time, we are learning that this Chinese spy balloon actually was able to transmit this data back in real time to the Chinese government, and that the Chinese government had the capability to remotely erase the data that the Chinese spy balloon was collecting. So that raises questions about whether the U.S. government actually knows the full extent of what the balloon was able to gather, because obviously now the U.S. government has been analyzing it in an FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia, and they have some sense of what the balloon was able to gather, but the possibility remains that there is much more that it was able to collect that the U.S. simply doesn't know about because Beijing was able to remotely erase it.
For 8 days, the President of the United States allowed that balloon to traverse or travel across the entire United States. And he told the American people that we couldn't shoot it down. We had to wait till it got over the ocean. Meanwhile, a week later, 3 other devices were shot down over U.S. skies, right? And come to find out, it took data from our military sites, and it went over and scanned some of those sites more than once or multiple times and transmitted that information back to China in real time. It is insanity to me that we allowed this to happen. And make no mistake, the president allowed this to happen in the United States.
NBC reported exclusively this week that China did collect information, intelligence, sensitive intelligence, by circling, doing figure eights over sensitive military sites. Contrary to what the U.S. was saying, what the administration was saying.
That's very disturbing. I mean, the one thing you have to understand, too, is never should they have been able to go through our airspace. And a balloon is almost like a drone. It's hovering. We know when a satellite comes over, we can cover up. But the idea that they are trying to collect, it shows how dangerous the world is for the future.
So on the balloon itself, right now, the FBI is the lead, still assessing the parts that we were able to recover from the balloon. As we mentioned early on when we first started tracking the balloon, we do know that the balloon was able to be maneuvered and purposely driven along its track, but not going to get into specific sites it was able to hover over. But what we did do is take precautionary steps to limit the intelligence value that it would be able to collect. And you know, again, we took steps to protect our own military installations from foreign intelligence collection. And I'm sorry, I think you had another question on the balloon, but I just didn't remember the second part.
It was on the being able to transmit to China. Sure. And were you able to prevent intelligence from some of these sites from China being able to collect from the balloon?
Because of the steps that we were able to take, we were able to prevent transmission of certain aspects of our sites to be transmitted, just because of the precautionary steps that we were able to take. But in terms of transmission back to the PRC and what was able to be transmitted back, I just don't have further information for you at this time. As of right now, we're still doing an assessment of what exactly the intel was that China was able to gather, but we do know that the steps that we took provided little additive value for what they've been able to collect on from satellites before. What we said at the very beginning was still holds true to today. As soon as we realized that they were collecting intelligence and hovering over our sensitive sites, we took measures and put into place measures that limited the additive value that the balloon could collect on.
Did you know at the time that they were able to transmit back in real time to Beijing?
Well, I wouldn't be able to say that they were able to transmit back to Beijing. We just don't have, I just don't have that type of information at this point.
So you're saying that is not confirmed at this point?
That is not confirmed at this point.
And how confident are you that the mitigation measures that you took actually worked? Or is there new evidence suggesting that some intelligence was collected despite the mitigation efforts?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So we are confident in the measures that we did put in place. I know I sound like a broken record. I don't mean to, but what we know is that the intent of this balloon was surveillance, and that the measures that we put in place did not had limited additive value for what they were able to collect over our sensitive sites.
Maybe you mean that the mitigation efforts limited?
Correct. I'm sorry. The mitigation efforts that we put into place had little additive value for the PRC. I cannot confirm that there was real-time transmission back from the balloon back to the PRC at this time.
Specifically.
Correct. I cannot confirm that.
And your
at this
analysis is ongoing on that.
time. Correct.
Is it possible that China could have collected sensitive information from military sites before you put these measures in place? Was there time for that to happen?
I mean, you have to remember that we started tracking the balloon around January 27th. So when the balloon was coming over and up through the United States, dipped into Canada, and then dipped back down, we were already taking precautionary measures at this time to mitigate any type of intelligence collection that the balloon would be able to pick up. And I think by that point, we had already identified that it was a PRC-affiliated balloon. So I think the measures that we put in place certainly limited what the PRC was able to collect, and that was on due diligence on our part.
You were able to predict the path of the balloon, so you knew what it was going to go over?
I don't think we would say that we were able to predict the path, but we were following the balloon. And as it did traverse over sensitive military sites, and as we mentioned early on when January, early February, we did see the balloon begin to hover over military sites. That certainly gave us pause. And
re-entered the United States,
correct.
right? Okay.
Yeah, when it dipped back down through Canada, yes.
When you talk about the mitigation efforts that the U.S. took, my understanding was that was mostly involving kind of limiting the information footprint, limiting the signals that the U.S. was using so as to not leave very much for that balloon to be able to intercept or to scoop up. Can you say whether there were also efforts to intercept any outgoing transmissions from the balloon as it maybe tried to transmit back to Beijing?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, that gets into our intelligence capabilities, which I just wouldn't be able to speak to on that front, so I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Dan. And then.
Thanks. Just on the balloon, when you say that you can't confirm that it was transmitting, the balloon was transmitting back to China, is that because that's classified, or that's because the Defense Department does not know, cannot determine that?
That's a great question. That's something that we're analyzing right now. That's something that we've been looking into. That's why we're doing some of the analysis at Quantico, and I just don't have an update for you on that just yet.
So when do you anticipate this assessment would be wrapped up?
I don't want to put a timeline on anything, as that could take a while, but it's certainly something that we can get back to you on.
Sure. So first, NBC reported this week that defense officials confirmed the Chinese spy balloon was able to gather intelligence from several sensitive American military sites before it was shot down. DoD pointed back to previous claims that the balloon had limited additive value and for intelligence collection that was over and above what China is likely able to collect through things like satellites in low Earth orbit. But the intelligence that China collected via this balloon was mostly from electronic signals, which are very specifically and inherently different from satellite data. So what then do you mean by limited additive value of what was collected by China?
I can't confirm that was what was collected. We're still doing an analysis of the high altitude balloon that we shot down.
Yesterday, DoD said they pointed us back to that last thing we've heard months ago, that it was limited additive value. So what I'm trying to understand is, do you mean they already had this information from satellites that are up there, or is it different from the signals? We're just trying to understand. The balloon flew over American people on the ground. What was collected? What do you mean by limited additive value?
Right. So what we mean by limited additive value is what Chinese satellites can collect on as they orbit versus what the balloon was able to collect, and the precautionary measures that we were able to put in place to guard against our sensitive data. We limited their ability to collect on our sites. So let me just finish here. So again, not going to comment on the specific reporting that I saw the reports in the NBC story. I'm not going to comment on what was being collected. We still are doing our analysis right now. The the intelligence community is involved in that. And again, this is something that the administration identified the problem. We addressed the problem. We feel confident in the precautionary measures that we were able to put in place, that the balloon was not able to gather sensitive information that would have provided any additional information that a satellite wouldn't have been able to collect.
Suggesting it's the same data that satellites would be collecting. That's what you're saying.
I'm suggesting that we're still doing an analysis, Brandy, and when we have more to provide, I'd be happy to do it.
Please let me know when you do. Two more for you. Senator Blumenthal, he and two legal firms just filed a lawsuit against the Department of Defense that claims that DoD is withholding information about toxic chemicals on military bases from Afghanistan veterans, some of whom are still reportedly suffering from sicknesses associated with this. So is the department withholding this information, and what's OSD's response to this lawsuit?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to comment on pending any lawsuit right now.